kicked off a exciting start to our fall semester. Students are ready to be, or to our spring semester. Students are ready to be back on campus, and I'm sure that's true around the Commonwealth. But today I'm here to speak in my capacity as chair of the Virginia Council of Presidents. Over the past 5 years, we've seen public higher education's positive impact on Virginia's economic strength and competitiveness, and we've been able to celebrate some significant successes. So thank you for the historic investments in higher education during this last session. However, as competition increases in a post-pandemic economy, if we pause now and simply tread water, we risk falling behind. I'd like to talk a little bit about supporting Virginia's workforce and economy. Virginia's highly skilled and qualified graduates are a necessary resource for the industries that will drive the Commonwealth's economic future. However, that resource is increasingly at risk. We are currently facing heightened competition from other states for both our jobs and our students. High school graduates are leaving Virginia for out-of-state schools because some of our highest in-demand colleges and universities don't have the capacity to admit them. Moreover, some of our universities lack the necessary resources to compete with financial aid offers from out-of-state institutions. Simply put, financial aid packages some of our out-of-state universities are offering are so aggressive that students are leaving or choosing to leave Virginia. And of course, when Virginia students, especially those in high-demand fields, choose to leave, it impacts the Commonwealth's ability to attract new industries and retain the ones we have.
Do you want to finish and take questions, or take questions as you go along?
Well, it's up to you. I'm happy to do either.
I was just going to ask, what number of students are you able to physically take versus what you are taking because you don't have the money to have the staff to keep it going the way you want it to?
Well, it's a great question, but I'm representing the entire Council of Presidents, so we've got 39 campuses to consider there, and they're kind of in two different pockets. We've got some that are impacted that essentially can't grow for various reasons and have a lot of enrollment pressure, and then we've got another group of campuses that are struggling to meet enrollment and have capacity. So my answers to those questions depend on... Virginia Tech is sort of bursting at the seams. We're about as big as we can get with our current constraints. Applications are up about 100% over the last decade and continue to grow. But we've held enrollment at the undergraduate level constant for 4 years because we don't have the housing or the capacity in town to deal with it. We have apartments available in town, but we don't have other aspects of what we need to grow.
What do you need, just briefly?
Well, I think in the case, I'm speaking here about Virginia Tech. It's a different story at each campus, but we're working on-campus housing for freshmen. That's one of the big challenges we've got, and we have we're behind in terms of indoor recreational space, but almost everything else we're in pretty good situation at Virginia Tech. But we froze enrollment at 30,000 4 years ago. To take time to work with the town, and we're in the midst of doing that, and the surrounding communities to understand where our limits are. But if I look at, we've got a number of campuses, 6 to 8, depending on how you count it, who have capacity right now or are struggling to meet enrollment. And I have some remarks in here, some suggestions of how we might address that. But they're all over the map. I think, Virginia Tech's probably a little unusual, but we have other institutions, of course, UVA and William & Mary have incredible application pressure as well, and some don't. So. As leaders of the Commonwealth's public institutions, we want to ensure that talented Virginia students have the opportunity to enroll in Virginia public institutions that can provide the education they need to meet their career goals. And once we have those in-state and the out-of-state students enrolled, we need to make sure that as many as possible stay in Virginia to begin their careers. We can keep more of our graduates in the Commonwealth by building a pathway that begins on the first day they set foot on a Virginia campus and continues after graduation as they begin a career with a Virginia employer. One of the most effective ways, and we've known this for years, and we're excited about the opportunities going forward, is to build that pathway through potential employers, through internships and other work-based learning opportunities. Although we have established pathways with many large employers, big companies typically already have internship programs and apprenticeship programs. We need to seek solutions that allow our students to gain valuable experiences in medium and small businesses, including startups, which lack the infrastructure to establish robust internship programs on their own. Last year, the Council of Presidents made a pledge. We all agreed to this, that every enrolled student who desired a paid internship would have one without extending the time to degree. So we need to advance toward this goal without making these opportunities cost prohibitive for low and middle income students. So part of that pledge is to build these experiences into our curricula so that work-based learning does not extend the time to degree. And that's a big challenge. We're all taking it on. We appreciate the fact that the General Assembly and the administration, along with the State Council of Higher Education for Virginia, the Virginia Chamber, the Virginia Business Higher Education Council, VTOP, Go Virginia, and VEDP are all taking this seriously. We have great alignment here. We're working with SHEV to develop the data we need to track our progress so that we can double down on programs that are successful in retaining talent in Virginia at Virginia employers. In terms of this upcoming fiscal year, as we look to the next fiscal year, there are many reasons to be optimistic. Although COVID is still with us, the crisis has abated, and Virginia's institutions have adapted in a manner that has made us more resilient and more responsive to meeting our students' needs. In addition, last session, the body provided significant incremental operating support for access and affordability in the first year of the biennium to Virginia's public colleges and universities, and championed much-needed salary increases in both years for faculty and staff in the face of unprecedented inflation and escalating labor market demands. That combination is so unusual. Your support was timely, and it made a big difference, so thank you for that. Going into fiscal year 24, we anticipate that we will once again face significant cost drivers. SHEV estimates that our non-general fund share of the 5% increase for faculty and staff salaries next year will cost Virginia's public institutions an additional $101 million. And to that, add to that impact of auxiliary employees, which must be fully covered by institutions. So these mainly affect student fees. In addition, while inflation appears to be cooling a bit, SHEV conservatively estimates that the cost of energy, operations, and maintenance of new facilities coming online and contractual escalations will exceed $54 million over the current year. And institutions continue to absorb unfunded mandates such as the Virginia Military Survivors and Dependents Educational Program, or VMS-DEP, which is projected to grow by more than $78 million this year. We love the program. The concept makes sense, but it's unfunded, and so that money, instead of coming from taxpayers, comes from the students paying tuition. We continue looking for ways to be more efficient, but efficiencies alone are not going to close this gap. Based on the 6-year plan submitted to SHEV in the fall, all Virginia's public institutions are anticipating tuition and fee increases in the coming year to cover salary increases in core services. The challenges for the upcoming year are particularly acute. As you will recall, last year, most of the institutions were able to provide one-time relief to students and families to offset tuition increases in fiscal year 23. We recognize collectively that the families of the students were feeling the full impact of inflation while wages and salaries were lagging. We were able to absorb that one-time hit by deploying reserves and making cuts. Because this reprieve was temporary, it merely delayed the impact of increasing costs imposed on our institutions, and that impact will be fully reflected in tuition rates in fiscal year 24. There's an opportunity in this session to mitigate the impact of the inflationary adjustments with incremental operating support from the legislature. Surely our institutions will continue to look for efficiencies and to reduce expenditures, but that alone will not be enough to avoid tuition increases. If I could say a few words about access and affordability. All of us have much more work to do to make Virginia higher education affordable for low and middle income students and their families. This challenge is compounded by the higher education marketplace, which is more competitive than ever. College enrollments are down across the country, and universities in other states are competing for our in-state students as well as out-of-state students that are considering Virginia institutions. At the same time, low and middle income Virginia students are finding it increasingly difficult to afford public four-year institutions, despite the fact that we have bent the curve on tuition rates over the last 5 years or so with a combination of new state appropriations and internal cost savings. And just as a side note there, all of our institutions across the board have average tuition increases over the last 5 years that are below CPI. Virginia has been recognized nationally for its top-performing public higher education sector, but we're not immune from the forces that are depressing enrollment and increasing competition for talent. And we see two opportunities here. The first is to ensure that we are providing pathways to an affordable education for low and middle-income Virginians who would like to stay in Virginia. The need here is financial aid from the Commonwealth, the federal government, private philanthropy, and institutional sources. We are facing severe shortages of healthcare professionals, teachers, daycare workers, among others, people who make our communities great places to live, work, and raise a family. We need affordable pathways to these professions. I'd like to thank the General Assembly and SHEV for making real progress here in fiscal year 23 and 24, but we still have more to do. The second opportunity is going on offense to retain mobile talent in Virginia and to attract out-of-state talent to Virginia. Increasingly, institutions in other states are offering deep discounts to top-performing Virginia high school students in STEM disciplines. It's becoming common to hear that Virginia students have offers to enroll at public institutions in surrounding states with effective tuition rates that compete with our in-state rates. For states south of us, they need the STEM talent to fuel economic growth in biotechnology, semiconductors, manufacturing, and computer science. The states north of us are primarily trying to fill empty seats for which the marginal cost of providing the education is well below the in-state tuition rate. If they don't fill those seats, those campuses will enter a death spiral. Virginia is in the muddled gray area between these two dynamics, north and south. Some of our institutions are seeing enrollment drops, and others are seeing growing demand, especially in STEM. But all of our institutions are going to be impacted by the rapidly changing enrollment dynamics as competition intensifies. I hope we can mutually explore innovative solutions to help ensure that Virginia's public universities are nationally competitive for all students at a time of increasing pressure on enrollments. This may be the time, for example, to reconsider the requirement that out-of-state tuition cover 100% of the average of the cost of providing that education. For some of our institutions with enrollment capacity, the marginal cost of educating a student is much below the in-state tuition and fee rate. For other institutions, recruiting out-of-state students from strategic populations where there is capacity may require competing more aggressively in the net price offered to those students. Virginia has wisely invested in quality higher education, and it's made a difference for our students and their families, our communities, our workforce, and the Commonwealth's economic outlook for the future. We can further leverage that investment by ensuring that our institutions provide a pathway that connects Virginia students with Virginia employers and Virginia jobs. However, the greatest colleges and universities in the world with the best employment pathways won't make a difference for talented Virginia students who can't afford the tuition and expense and are pulled away from the Commonwealth by higher financial aid offers from other states. After investing so much time, effort, and resources in public higher education in Virginia, let's make sure our students are able to attend. They need us, we need them, and it's a win-win for everyone. So thank you for listening to my prepared remarks. I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you, President Sands, for your remarks, and we will now entertain questions, for which I'm sure there are some.
Very good.
Yes, yes, Senator Howell.
I'd like to go back to the possibility of a continuing tuition freeze. We've been that way before in the Commonwealth, I think before your time here, but we've been there. And although on a temporary basis, a very short-term basis, it was helpful. But we discovered rather quickly that the longer-term impact was larger classes, and then even a more disastrous thing of having to cut out classes so that students couldn't take the required courses they needed and needed to go for an extra year. So it saved them nothing, actually cost them. So I'm curious about your perspective on that, but I'm also sending out a warning that that is not a direction that it's been shown to be effective here in Virginia.
Well, I'd love to go back to the 67-33 split we had some time ago before the series of recessions that ratcheted us down. I mean, thanks to the General Assembly and all your hard work, the last 5 years have been a stabilizing period. We haven't been falling further, and that's been very helpful. But in the end, the fraction of the education that our students and their families have to pay in Virginia is higher than surrounding states, and we've known that we're a high tuition, low support state overall, and our institutions are varied, so they all have different stories to tell. But certainly, you're correct that if you restrict tuition increases at the same time we restrict the appropriation, in other words, we don't balance those two, we have to figure out a solution, and usually that is larger class sizes, and fewer offerings. That's just the natural course of it. Now, I would say that our institutions have been very committed to finding efficiencies, and I think many of them have done an excellent job at that. I know what it feels like from inside one institution as to what we try to do in terms of reallocation every year. Regardless of our financial situation, we try to reallocate and find those efficiencies. But you can only go so far before you start entering that scenario that you described. Senator, thank you.
Senator Norman.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, Dr. Sands. Two questions. Right now, based upon your approximate 30,000 student enrollment, what is the ratio in-state, out-state?
It's about 69-31, 69% in-state. This is for Virginia Tech. I don't have those.
No,
Yeah.
I'm just
Yeah.
talking about tech, not across the board.
That's undergraduate, yeah.
I do appreciate sometimes the awkwardness of being the spokesperson for the for the President's Council, because you're speaking really universally as opposed to tech on it. And right now, what is the approximate amount of your restricted and unrestricted endowment?
Our total endowment is about $1.69 billion, and I think the unrestricted is around 15% of that on that order. I could get an exact number, but something like that. So our endowment is small for the size of our university compared to peers, land-grant peer institutions. But it's not trivial. We have a bigger endowment than all but a few of Virginia institutions
Yes,
on a
sir.
per-student basis, probably fourth, I think.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Senator Edwards.
Yeah, Dr. Sands, nice to see you again.
Good to see you.
What is, you talk about back to the one-third, two-third. I had a resolution passed in 1997 to do just that, and we haven't been successful. Where is it now in terms of what the in-state students pay versus what the state pays?
It's around 50-50-ish, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Been that way for a long time. How much?
And there's a lot of variability from institution to institution, by the way. But yeah.
We've heard as high as 2/3 state, 1/3, 2/3.
Senator Sasslaw.
Yeah,
State.
yeah,
What we want to do is put it back the way it used to be.
yeah. So my question would be, how much would it cost overall? Do you have any feel for that?
Yeah, it'd be somewhere between 600 and 850 million.
Okay.
What
Yeah,
we got from
I think I'm questioning.
654.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Madam Chairman, I think I have the floor if I'm not mistaken. Thank you. I'm a good friend.
Just trying to help.
Yeah, I know, and I agree with you. So we have money in the bank right now. The state has the money if it's willing to do it. So we think between 600,000 and 800,000
Million.
million, yeah,
Never sure
million,
thousand.
yeah, million. I put in a budget amendment, I think, for 100 million, something like that. That's just a guess. That would help. How much would 100 million do? Do you have any idea?
100 million? Well, I mean, 100 million would help us get through this current cycle, fiscal year 24, in good shape. I think that would significantly depress the tuition rate increases. I can't give you an exact number, but that, as I mentioned before, the inflation or the inflationary impact on our institutions just from the salary increases is about 101 million this year coming up. So that would pretty much take care of that inflationary impact on the average.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned, Madam Chair, the tech is
Senator Edwards,
Yeah,
he's
Laura-
here on behalf of the Council of Presidents, not just for tech.
that the Virginia Tech, well, in particular Virginia Tech being a land-grant university, has an endowment lower than other land-grant universities throughout the country. Do you know how much lower on average?
Well, I don't have all the numbers in my head, but when I'm speaking again for Virginia Tech, and every institution is different, but ours was around 800 million back 7 years ago. It's now 1.69 billion, so it's doubled. But many of our peer institutions are around 4 or 5 billion. So
see. Okay.
that's you can work it. So the money that comes into the endowment is redistributed at a rate of about 4% to 5% per year. That's the amount that we take out of the endowment to preserve it every year. And there's a whole process for determining
yeah,
that amount.
yeah.
So just to give you scale, that's about how much comes back. So you can take, 4% of 1.7 billion, and that's roughly how much comes back to our university with a operating budget of about 1.75 billion.
Madam Chair, I have another question.
Senator Edwards, we're going to have to curtail the questions at this point because we have two other
right.
reports, and there's another committee that meets in this room after us. Thank you, President
Thank you.
Sands.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Lauren Excel for JLARC.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. I'm Lauren Axel, and I was JLARC's project leader for the 2020 review of higher education financial aid. Thank you very much for having me here this afternoon to discuss our research findings and recommendations. For our study, JLARC staff were directed to review student financial aid at Virginia's public four-year institutions. We looked at financial aid awarding practices and policies, as well as the state's financial aid funding at all public four-year institutions. We finished our research and shared the results with the JLARC Commission this past November. There are three topics I wanted to cover this afternoon, and I'll start with higher education costs and our financial aid trends analysis. Higher education costs are a key driver of students' need for financial aid, and costs vary widely for in-state undergraduates at the public four-year institutions in our state. Tuition and fees range from just over $9,000 per year at Virginia State to over $23,500 per year at William & Mary in 2020-21. The statewide average was just under $14,000, which you can see on the graphic with that teal line. Other living expenses, such as room and board, are also part of the higher education cost picture, and when they're included, total costs increase quite a bit, particularly at a few institutions, as you can see with those light blue portions of the bar. To help cover higher education costs, students can receive several types of financial aid, including federal, state, institutional, and other aid from private or local government sources. Financial aid from all sources totaled $671 million for in-state undergraduates in 2020-21. You can see the level of support students received from the different types of aid in this bar chart, or pie graph, excuse me. State aid was over 1/4 of undergraduates' total aid. Financial aid has grown over the past decade, but it hasn't kept pace with the growth in student need. Several trends do contribute to this, including that tuition and fee costs increased 33% on average, adjusted for inflation. Students' expected family contribution towards higher education decreased 40% on average. And the number of students with no ability to pay grew 11%. Together, these three things mean that more students need financial aid, and the amount of aid needed per student has grown. Total financial aid awards have increased nearly 50%, but the increase hasn't been enough to offset the combined effect of growing costs and students' declining ability to pay. As a result, as of 2020-21, in-state undergraduates had $162 million in unmet tuition and fee need that had not been addressed through financial aid. This figure on slide 7 shows how the unmet need breaks down by student ability to pay. The dark blue portion shows students with no ability to pay, or $0 of expected family contribution. These students had nearly half of the state's unmet need. They were largely concentrated at George Mason, Old Dominion, and Virginia Commonwealth University. When need is not addressed through financial aid, many students must take on debt. Specifically, 56% of in-state undergraduates who graduated in 2020-21 had debt when they got their degree. Their debt averaged nearly $30,000 per student and totaled $537 million. Students who start college but do not graduate also accumulate debt. Over half of students who enrolled at but did not graduate from a Virginia public four-year in the year 2015-16 had debt. Importantly, the total debt among in-state undergraduates has increased nearly 20% over the past decade, and that's adjusted for inflation.
What does that come to dollar-wise?
For the total amount of debt, I believe we have that in the report, but I don't have that number off the top of my head. Okay. And I should mention, we do have a written report with a lot more detail on these facts and figures if you're interested. That's right. On slide 9, students at Virginia's public access institutions, including HBCUs, have particularly high unmet financial need and debt. There's no formal definition for access institutions, so our team came up with a definition based on the portion of students that schools admit. Several public 4 years admit nearly all of the undergraduates who apply, including George Mason, Old Dominion, Virginia Commonwealth, Norfolk State, and Virginia State. This group of institutions had nearly 3/4 of the state's total unmet need and over half of the statewide debt. They also had low retention and graduation rates compared to other institutions in the state, in part because of the financial challenges experienced by many of their students. Together, these trends show a strong need for financial aid at Virginia's access institutions. I provided a lot of information about financial aid, unmet need, and student debt. And the figures I've shared are largely for the 2020-21 academic year because that was the most recent data available during our study. The blue dots on our slide 10 show state financial aid funding levels by institution at the time of those trends. I do want to note that for fiscal year 24, though, the General Assembly has significantly increased state funding. And the funding increase that you've provided will undoubtedly address a large portion of the $162 million in remaining unmet tuition and fee need that I cited a few slides back. Its impact is unknown, though, because we don't yet know students' expected family contributions or the financial aid awards for the coming academic year when the funds will be spent. Now I'll move on to findings on the state's financial aid program requirements. The state's primary financial aid grant programs for in-state undergraduates are the Virginia Guaranteed Assistance Program, or VGAP, and the Virginia Commonwealth Award Program. Students must meet several eligibility requirements to receive VGAP or Commonwealth Award grants. VGAP has several requirements for credit completion, including that recipients stay full-time and progress a class level each year. VGAP has 2 GPA requirements as well, one for a minimum high school GPA of 2.5 and the other for a minimum college GPA of 2.0. And similar to VGAP, the Commonwealth Award Program is need-based, but recipients can take as few as 6 credit hours per semester. They also have to meet their institution's satisfactory academic progress, or SAP requirements, which includes a minimum GPA that is 2.0 or slightly lower. One additional thing to note about both of these programs is they're separate. Students can only receive an award from one at a time. We found that VGAP's requirements that recipients be full-time and progress prevent many needy students from receiving grants, especially part-time students. About 1/4 of in-state undergraduates, over 24,000, were part-time in 2020-21 and therefore ineligible for VGAP. Over 30% of these students had no ability to pay because they had $0 of expected family contribution. Even among students who initially meet VGAP's requirements, many lost eligibility because they took fewer credit hours than required to be full-time and progress. Instead of having these requirements, other states and the Virginia's Commonwealth Award allow students to receive prorated grants depending on their course load. A minimum number of credit hours is often set, though, to ensure students are still degree seeking. VGAP's GPA requirements also prevent some needy students from accessing VGAP, but they do affect fewer students. Both GPA requirements are fairly duplicative because institutions already have their own minimum admission standards for enrolling students, and they already verify students' academic performance using the SAP requirements. Many other states, Virginia's Commonwealth Award and federal Pell, all use institutions' SAP requirements for state grant eligibility. We have 3 recommendations in our report to streamline VGAP's eligibility requirements to better enable needy students to access the state grants. First, we recommend the General Assembly consider allowing in-state undergraduates who are enrolled in at least 6 credit hours to receive prorated VGAP grants. This would go a long way towards improving access because part-time students would not be disqualified from receiving VGAP. Second and third recommendations are for the General Assembly to consider eliminating VGAP's current GPA requirements and instead rely on institutions' existing academic performance standards. Another finding that emerged from our research on state financial aid program requirements is that having 2 separate state grant programs causes confusion among students, and it increases the workload of financial aid staff. Based on feedback from SHEV and financial aid staff at Virginia's public institutions, it's clear that combining VGAP and the Commonwealth Award grant programs would be beneficial. Students would no longer have to understand 2 separate sets of eligibility criteria and award amounts, something that's currently a source of confusion. Financial aid staff also would not have to switch students between 2 programs as the student eligibility changes. As far as implementation goes, if Virginia combined its grant programs, the remaining programs should ideally reflect the Commonwealth Award's eligibility requirements, which are more accessible to the needy students in the state. Therefore, we recommend the General Assembly consider eliminating VGAP and integrating it with the Virginia Commonwealth Award program. And I'll now turn to my last section to discuss financial aid program awards and funding. The way Virginia's financial aid is currently structured, institutions have different policies for awarding VGAP and Commonwealth Award grants. Each institution adopts its own financial aid awarding schedules, which lay out which metric will be used to measure the student's need, which students are eligible for state grants based on their level of need, and the maximum state grant awards. State law currently allows institutions to design their own schedules and award state grants differently, as long as awards are larger for students with more need. Having different awarding schedules and amounts is not necessarily a bad thing. However, when we looked at how the variation affected student state grant awards, we found that some institutions awarded $37 million in state grants to students with comparatively less need in 2020-21. This breakout for that was $5.8 million to students with minimal need and $31.2 million to students with moderate financial need. These students do have legitimate need, especially those with moderate need, who are often referred to as the missing middle, because they are not eligible for federal Pell Grants. However, awarding state grants to them does not use limited state funds as prudently as possible to assist the students most reliant on aid.
Senator Sasslaw.
You have students with minimal financial need, expected family contribution, $15,000. That's the student share of the family share, student share of the average in-state tuition is 15 for the student and 8 for the state.
That definition, Senator Sasslaw,
what?
the definition that we came up with, that students with minimal financial need,
Right.
that's any student that
They
has.
didn't need financial aid. They paid on average $15,000.
That's
The
correct.
state share of that total tuition was about another $7,000 or $8,000.
In some cases, the state, there's no set state share. So in many cases, the state would not be providing financial aid to
I'm not talking
the
about
students.
financial aid, I'm talking about just plain tuition. In other words, no, financial aid, in my example, is not involved. I get accepted to ABC College. They say, your bill is $15,000 a year. My understanding is that based on the average and what it's become, the state then would be paying 1/3, the student 2/3, which means the state would pay 8, almost 8, and the student 15.
Senator
Is that
Sasslaw,
roughly correct, or is it not correct?
I'm not quite sure how the numbers would work out with how the state funds non-financial aid funding. When we looked at this example,
What I'm talking about is we've been told that as opposed to 25 years ago, before the advent of the car tax, with respect to the cost, okay, of educating a kid in college, it's gone from the state paying 2/3 of that cost and the family paying 1/3. It's reversed. Is that not accurate?
I might defer to Chev on that one. I'm not sure if they've run those numbers recently, but
Dr. Sands said.
Peter?
Yeah, that's about right.
Madam Chair, your math is, Peter Blake from Chev, your math is correct. If it was at 2/3 and now it's at 1/3, then how you did that calculation of 15,000 and 8,000, the math is correct. It varies by institution
Right.
over the
No,
period.
no.
But yes.
Okay.
okay. All right. There are no additional questions on this slide. So given that this discretion has resulted in different institutions allocating the aid that they do receive differently, we concluded that to more effectively target limited state grant funding to students with the greatest need, the state should be more prescriptive about student eligibility for state aid. Additional parameters would help direct limited state funding to the neediest students statewide, and there are two approaches the state could take to set such parameters, which I'll describe a bit more in a couple of slides. Regardless of which approach is taken, though, a change is needed if the state wishes to better target grant funding to the neediest students. And that's why we have a recommendation for the General Assembly to consider establishing additional parameters for state grant awards that ensure public institutions are prioritizing state grant funding to students with the most financial need. One possible approach to implementing additional parameters is implementing a statewide awarding schedule to specify for public institutions the level of financial need that qualifies students for aid and the size of students' awards. All public institutions would be required to use the same schedule, and there are a few pros and cons to this approach, and I'll go ahead and click through them just for the sake of time. And another option for improving the way institutions award financial aid is to require public institutions to restrict state grants just to the neediest students. This would prevent institutions from awarding VGAP and Commonwealth Award grants to students with less financial need and instead redirect funds to larger grants for the neediest students. This, like the other, does have a few pros and cons, which are detailed on the slide. Madam Chair, I'll wrap up there for the sake of time, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions to Lauren?
Madam Chairman,
Senator Howell?
I think this is a tremendously important study, and I'm really pleased with the work that was put in on it. I'm curious, has anybody put in bills to implement it that you know of, and are budget amendments in to implement?
Senator Howell, we have not seen anything yet in terms of legislation or amendments that would directly relate to our recommendations, though I know Senator Norman did mention that he has a budget amendment for.
I was pointing to you because I knew that you were going to ask something.
I put a budget amendment in for $100 million in additional financial aid.
Okay. And based on this? Or,
Based on Tommyism.
okay, the Tommyism, okay.
You know,
And
like the Tommy
were you-
this is a Tommy
Were
aid.
you,
Hey, Tommy tax, article in the paper. Tommy tax.
I know we know about the Tommy tax.
$90 million it produced.
So this is the
Republicans
this
still
is the
hate it.
Tommy aid amendment.
Well, what I'm curious is how we find a path forward to implement some of these. And since there are no bills, it sounds like it's
What
going to
do we
have to
do?
be in the budget.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.
Okay, next we will have a Chev update, and you all have got to speed dial.
Speed dial.
Yeah, because resources is after us, and
Yeah, we want to get out
we
before.
need to get out before they start bombarding us.
Feel the pressure. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. I'm Tom Allison from Chev and my colleague Lee Andes. There's a lot of information in your packet, so I think we're just going to hit some highlights very quickly. looks like, don't have the full slide packet there, but on slide 7 in your packet, I wanted to draw your attention to the new formula that Chev adopted in 2019 at the direction of the General Assembly to drive more additional funds of financial aid to institutions with high rates of unmet need. And you see the formula there where we take the average cost of attendance, multiplied by a 70% discount, subtract grants, and that expected family contribution, which we just discussed. And then that resulting value becomes the average unmet need for each institution. So the scatter plot on slide 8, the x-axis on that scatter plot is the average unmet need by institutions. And you can see, as Ms. Excel referred to in the previous presentation, there is a wide amount of variation in unmet need between institutions, ranging from $500 all the way up to $6,500. And this drives Chev's recommendations in terms of new dollars per student that the General Assembly and the budget invested the additional $130 million in fiscal year 24, largely based on the average unmet need of those students. So just wanted to emphasize how that new formula drives additional funds to students with a high average unmet need. And then lastly, on slide 9, you can see how we're making progress towards meeting that unmet need through the additional general fund appropriations in the budget for financial aid. Happy to give it over to you, Lee.
All right, very quickly, Madam Chair, I'm going to just speed through this for your benefit for the next meeting. You asked for a quick update on the Pell Initiative. It's an initiative to try to increase Pell enrollments and completion rates. That we have with $250,000 this year to hire a consultant. We have hired HCM Strategist. That's a company that's well known here in Virginia. And in the second year, there's $25 million to be allocated to the institutions to then develop the strategies that will then increase Pell enrollment and completion rates. So we look forward to that taking place during this next year. We are in this process. We are wanting to prioritize increasing low-income applications. We're trying to increase our application pool, not just move students around, and so we can better serve these students. You asked about tuition revenue used for financial aid. In your packet, I have several charts.
Yes, question.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry to slow down the train. Thank you.
That's okay.
I'm looking on slide 12. Tell me what that
Yes, sir.
second bullet means. 25 million second year to fund institutional initiatives to increase the enrollments or retention. What is that 25 million going to do?
The $25 million is there. This initiative is designed to increase the Pell enrollment rates. There are some institutions that are below average on Pell enrollments. Then there are institutions that are below average on Pell completion rates, helping them get through college. So what we're doing for this year is developing a matrix of ideas of here's proven activities that will improve either Pell enrollments or completion rates. And then this...
Let me cut to the chase.
Yes, sir.
Is any of that $25 million going to be a pass-through to provide more Pell grants, or is this to look at initiatives? In other words, is this part of the study and putting together a strategy?
We're anticipating many strategies. I think part of this could be financial aid, but I think we're expecting some actual initiatives to find these students who are unreached. There are students out there who are not applying for college, who might be college ready. We will find out what's keeping them from enrolling so we can remove those barriers and help get them in school.
Okay. Is that what your, you said you were hiring
HCM strategists.
HCM, is
Yes,
that
ma'am.
what they're going to help you do?
They're going to help us develop that matrix of activities that are proven to improve these two calculations. Moving quickly, if you don't, at your discretion, Madam Chair, you asked me about to present tuition revenue for financial aid. There's a number of charts in there showing the institution's usage of tuition revenue, the receipt of the tuition revenue by in-state undergraduate students. That's the charts, page 21 and 22. And then I'm happy to take any questions on that. I'm just trying, just for sake of brevity. You heard earlier from JLARC finally listing their recommendations that they reviewed state financial aid. Chev did our own review of state financial aid. We made 8 recommendations compared to their 13. Those are very much in alignment. There's a few differences of opinion, but even where there's differences, we're going in the same direction. So we're looking forward to this next year, pending further direction from the General Assembly, on developing those recommendations into something that's actionable for you to consider at a future date. Hope I didn't go too fast. Hope I was what you needed. I'm happy to take any questions.
Madam Chairman.
Senator Howell.
Well, you said further direction from the General Assembly, and for what it's worth, and I'm only speaking for myself, this is a very high priority that we get this implemented.
Right.
And let us know what you need.
Understood. We're ready to go.
Senator Norman, I know you have a question in there somewhere.
I do, but I'm going to spare him. Thank you for asking.
Okay. You just in time for us to adjourn, Frank. No, any other questions? Okay, so we will be here next week. Member amendments next week, so, okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Thank you all so much. Sorry you had to speed through it, but we know that people are, clamoring to get in here for resources. Okay. Okay.